Once again, it is time for another episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about this big guy, which is a McIntosh MC352 Power Amplifier. McIntosh sold these between 1998 and 2004 at a cost of $5,300, which would be about $9,400 today. It was rated at 350 watts per channel, both channels driven, at not more than 0.005% THD into either 8, 4, or even 2 ohms. It weighs in at 105 pounds and is about 17.5 inches wide by 22 inches deep by about 9 inches depth, top to bottom. So right now we'll take a tour of the front and the back and the top and the sides, and hopefully I'll have some help flipping it over, and we'll look at the circuitry on the inside of this beautiful MC352. So this is a closer view of the front of the MC352, and I'll start over here with these two LEDs. They are the Power Guard LEDs, and when those come on, it means that you've exceeded more than 2% THD, and so the MC352 will adjust the volume. Basically, it'll lower the gain so that the amplifier doesn't exceed more than 2% THD, and it lets you reach even louder power levels than it's capable by itself. But that's kind of the function of the Power Guard. So this knob right here is for the meter, and it has 3 positions. It has watts, hold, and lights off. We'll see how that works in just a minute. And over here for our power switch, we have off, remote, and on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And it has that beautiful blue and green against the black background McIntosh look. And so you can kind of just see those are big blue meters. They go, the 0 dB point is at 350 watts, and it goes all the way up to 1400 watts. I should point out that according to the McIntosh brochure on the MC352, it's actually reading peak watts, and it doesn't have to be reset depending on whether you're on 2 ohms or 4 ohms or 8 ohms. It's going to read the real power level. Also, this hold position right here, or that hold function, what that does is allows you to see the peak level that the music hit, and after a while, if it doesn't change, it'll slowly go back down if it's on the hold position. So it kind of lets you see the peak power levels that you've been hitting over a certain period of time. So that's kind of cool if you want it on that. And then of course, if for some reason you want it totally dark, you can turn the lights off. But that's kind of the way it looks from the front. This obviously is the rear of the MC352, and we'll start right here with our power controls. We have our trigger in and our trigger out. We also have our XLR balanced inputs right here, and here are our RCA unbalanced inputs. We do have a switch here that selects between either balanced or unbalanced input mode. If you were to use this thing as a mono block, you would connect to the right channel, the one in red there, and you would set this little switch down here to mono. Over here we have our power cord connection, obviously, and we do have a user replaceable fuse there. Now, for 8 ohm speakers, we would connect here for the right channel, and we would connect for 4 ohm speakers over to here for the right channel. Over here for the left channel are our 4 ohm speaker connections. For the left channel over here we have our 8 ohm speaker connections. For 2 ohm speakers we're going to be using these guys. These two would be for the left channel, and these two would be for the right channel. And that's kind of the back of the MC352. And this is a side view of the MC352. Right here we have a massive heatsink, one of the couple of them. Right here is one of the auto transformers, and you can see it's kind of got a very nice chrome finish to the chassis. I've removed the bottom cover of the MC352 because I need to get to the pots right here where you adjust the power meter, and the power meter is off by a bit more than I would like. Now both channels are off by the same amount, but it is reading way too much power than it should, so there are some adjustment pots there, and I will hopefully be able to adjust them to be more accurate. But while I had the bottom off, I thought we would look at it, and you can kind of just see how well everything is put together. They have good quality components, and it's just very, very neat. Here's our heat sinks here, and you can kind of see where our speaker connections are over there. And just in general, we have it built so that it could be disassembled easily for repair should it ever need it. Here we have our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the MC352 putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. And you can see that the THD is 0.2%, 0.003%. That's really good. The SNRs are about 98, 99 dB. That's really good. And you can see that the amplifier gain is about 27 dB, so it looks really, really good. And of course the THD plus noise is better than minus 90 dB, so this thing is looking really, really good at 5 watts into 8 ohms. Here we have the MC352 putting out 5 watts into 4 ohms, and it is showing less than 0.003% THD. And the SNRs are both 95, we'll call it 96 dB or so, and the THD plus noise is better than minus 90 dB. So this thing looks really good. We're also showing 26.5 dB of gain. So this guy is looking really, really good. Here is the frequency response plot of the MC352, and we're going from 10 hertz to 40 kilohertz this time. Now there is a specification that from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, the frequency response should be plus 0 to minus 0.25 dB. So let's see how we're doing. Right here would be our 20 hertz, and we're down maybe 0.1 dB, so we're doing really good there. And at 20 kilohertz, we're about right here, so we're down 0.45 dB, so we're 0.2 of a dB beyond the requirement, but it's still pretty darn good considering this amplifier's at least 20 years old. Here we're looking at the frequency response from 10 hertz to 40 kilohertz of the MC352, with it putting out 5 watts into 4 ohms. And if we look over here at 20 hertz, at this point right here, we're down 0.1 of a dB. And if we look at 20 kilohertz, which should be right here, we're down about half a dB. So the specification was plus 0 to minus 0.25 dB. So we're down about 0.25 dB more than the spec said, but it's still pretty good. It's slightly worse on the high end than it was with an 8 ohm load. This is a plot of the MC352's output impedance from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and this equates to a damping factor of about 73, which is one of the best I have measured to date. Here is the MC352's multi-tone test response, and if you calculate it, it shows a distortion-free range of about 15 to 16 bits. This is a plot that shows the MC352's crosstalk between the right and left channels. The active channel is putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms, and you're measuring the leakage onto the other channel. In this case, it looks like our right to left crosstalk is above 100 dB. That's just outstanding. And the left channel looks kind of more normal, but it's still really good, starting out at about 105 dB, and at 20 kilohertz it's down to 68 dB or so. That is really good crosstalk performance. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the MC352 putting out between 366 watts and 374 watts into 8 ohms. Now the specification was that it could put out 350 watts into 8 ohms at not more than 0.005% THD. Well, we're at 0.03%, we'll call it. So we're probably a factor of 10 worse than the spec, but 0.03% THD at 350 watts is pretty darn impressive in my book. The SNRs are above 103 dB. You can see that we still have our 28, almost 29 dB of gain. And the THD plus noise is right around minus 70 dB. Now there is a specification for a weighted signal to noise ratio for the unbalanced input, which is what I'm using right now as the unbalanced inputs. It should be 116 dB below the rated output. So this would be 0 and 116 dB would be somewhere here. So the noise is more this stuff here. So we're definitely better than that. The harmonic stuff is right here, and that's where you get your THD plus noise. But it does meet the SNR requirement. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the MC352 putting out about 357 watts into 4 ohms. Our gain is still about 26.5 dB. The THD is better than 0.005%, which is the spec limit. And our SNRs are about 106 dB, and the THD plus noise is at least minus 86 dB. The other thing to note is that I do have the A weighting applied here per the spec, just kind of to look at the signal to noise ratio, which says it should be about 116 dB below the max power at the full power rating. So we are better than 120 dB down. The noise stuff would be all this kind of stuff down here. So we are better than the 120 dB down. So this thing looks really good into 4 ohms as well. And here is a plot of the harmonics with the MC352 putting out 360 watt into 4 ohms. Pretty much kind of the same thing we saw with the 8 ohm loads. The third or odd harmonic is higher than the second or even harmonic. That seems to be the case all the way down the line with all the other harmonics, which is what you would expect with a solid state amp most of the time. So this plot shows the THD versus frequency at a couple of different power levels, and that's into 8 ohms. And let me explain the little key here. This plus 4 would be equivalent to an input signal level of 4 dBV, which yields about 250 watts in 8 ohms, and R is right channel, left is left channel, obviously. And then it increases by 3 dB steps. The plus 1 would be 125 watts, and so on. And minus 14's about 3.7 watts, something like that. So that's showing quite a range of different power levels. The maximum THD is under 0.03%. Now the specification was that it had to be better than 0.005% across the band from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So we're not quite doing that, but I'll take something that is 0.03% THD any day of the week, and this thing looks really good. Here we have the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the MC352 putting out about 460 watts into 4 ohms. You can see the THD plus noise has crept up. Now, I didn't show that before. I'm just showing it for this measurement. And I kind of wanted to keep this less than 1%, which is a standard for measuring like dynamic headroom, that kind of thing. And also you can see that our THD, where it was like 0.004%, is now about 0.2% or so, which is still really good. But you can see the harmonics are being generated a lot here, particularly on the left channel. Let me just show the right channel. We're seeing them there too, but what was happening is that the power guard light on the amplifier was coming on the right channel. And when that starts happening, the amplifier will start reducing the gain so it doesn't continue to clip. So kind of this is where the max power is for this amplifier. Probably can get a little bit more than that, but 460 watts into 4 ohms is pretty darn good. This plot shows the output impedance of the MC352, and this is using the 4 ohm taps to connect to the loads, whereas the last output impedance was done using the 8 ohm taps, and pretty much it looks the same. It's very, very low impedance. What we are looking at here is a two-tone test. In this case, my tones are at 19 kilohertz and 20 kilohertz, and the levels are adjusted by themselves so that each one is giving 5 watts into 4 ohm loads, and so when you combine them you are seeing the 10 watts into 4 ohm loads. And what you are looking for are the products of the two tones beating against each other and subtracting and that kind of thing. And our frequency range is expanded. We were starting over at 10 hertz on over to 50 kilohertz here. And basically our worst tones are right here, and they're 100 dB down better than that, which would give us a distortion-free range of about 17 bits. This plot shows the system noise of the McIntosh MC352. In this case, both inputs are terminated into shorts, and we're looking into 4 ohm loads, and it is better than 100 dB. So the noise level is really clean on this amplifier. As you saw from the test data, this gorgeous McIntosh MC352 amplifier did a pretty good job of meeting the majority of its specifications from nearly 20 years ago. I think it was off a little bit on the THD at 360 watts into 8 ohms. It was reading, we'll say, 0.03% THD, where the specification was better than 0.005% THD. I'm not going to worry about 0.03% THD at 360 watts and at 1 kilohertz, of course. Now, into a 4 ohm load, it did meet that requirement. I believe it was 0.003% THD at 360 watts into 4 ohms. If I didn't mention it earlier, all the testing I did was using the unbalanced inputs on this amplifier. As far as listening to the MC352, I connect it to the system. You can kind of see it behind me. The preamp tuner is a Carver CT7, and I use the Wilson WA3 Puppy 2s. I think you can just see the outskirts of one of them here in the background to my right. And the amplifier sounded great. It didn't add anything or subtract anything. It just sounded really nice and clean, what you would expect a nice power amp to do. Before I started my testing, I terminated the inputs into shorts and listened for any hum. Absolutely quiet. I couldn't tell the amplifier was on. That is very rare for a power amplifier, at least from all the stuff that I've tested, or a receiver or integrated amp, not to have just a little bit of hum or hiss when the inputs are terminated. Absolutely quiet. Kudos to McIntosh. The only sound that I heard when turning the MC352 on or off was from the internal relay that supplies power for most of the functions of the amplifier. And let me just see if you can hear it here. That's the trigger position. You don't really hear anything. And that was it. You hear it go off, and then the power is all off. Now, there was nothing at all coming out of the speakers. Hopefully you were able to kind of hear the relay click. The other thing I should note is that when I was listening, I was hitting levels typically between 80 dB SPLs and as high as 98 dB SPLs. And for some of that listening, I kind of walk around another part of the house so it's not so loud, just to let the amp warm up so I can measure and see how hot it gets. And after a good half hour of pretty loud listening, it got as high as 120 degrees F on the heat sinks on either side. My room is actually at about 82 F, so it kind of just is starting out a little bit on the warm side anyway, and it only hit, like I said, 120 degrees F after a good level of listening. My point is that it is a very cool running amplifier for the most part for something that is as massive as this guy. The only thing that was off on the MC352 that I have here was the power meters were off. I mentioned it a little bit in the tour video where I was showing where the trim pots were. I did reach out to McIntosh and they did get back to me as far as the procedure to use to adjust the power meters. I opted to calibrate it at 35 watts and that seemed to work pretty good when I got up to the 350 watt or 350 milliwatts. To be totally honest, at 350 watts it reads a little low, but at 35 watts, and that's into 8 ohms, it's dead on. And with most power meters, they're going to be off a little bit throughout the entire range. You kind of can pick one point that you want them calibrated at and hope that it falls in line when it gets higher up. And it's close enough for, you know, being a power meter. It's not a medical instrument. So anyway, so the power meters work well. I should talk about the hold feature a little bit. So the hold feature is a little bit different on this unit in that it will hold it, and then after a while, if you don't exceed that power level, it slowly drops down to the next peak. So it holds it for a decent period of time, and then they will slowly decay. It's also nice to be able to turn the lights off sometimes just to save on the bulb. These have actual incandescent lights in them. At some point, I suppose when the bulbs go out, I'll have it replaced with LEDs. And other than that, it's just a pleasure to look at. Now, I do have two qualms. The first is, at 105 pounds, it's not something I can easily move around by myself. I would require assistance if it's more than moving it around on this cart. And my other little nit is that the speaker connectors aren't as nice as some of the newer McIntosh amplifiers, but they're perfectly acceptable. Other than that, this is just a nice piece of industrial art, I will call it, to look at, kind of like the MC30s or Mac Kit 30s as I have. And I just enjoy the McIntosh look as well as the Marantz look, and I believe there's a few other receivers or pieces of gear that kind of just have a nice look to them. So be that as it may, that is kind of my review of the MC352. Of course, I'd like to hear any comments you may have, and if you have not subscribed to the channel, that would be a nice thing to do, as well as hit the like button if you did like the video. And I think I mentioned earlier at the start of the video, but if not, I'll mention again, I will have my email in the description, and you can email me with some questions you may have for an upcoming video on just maybe general audio related questions that aren't maybe related to this particular video, but just something that you may want to ask about audio. And if I get enough questions for 10 or 15 minutes, I will do a little video on that. Oh boy. Once again, I thank you for watching, and until next time, have a great day or night.